Good morning and welcome to my talk. I'm Jonas, working for Eclipse. We are a company providing services around Eclipse open source technologies. My topic for today is the Ecore Editor. Short question for you before I get started. Who of you has used Ecore or EMF before? That's good. That's the right talk for you. Who prefers to modify or create models in a graphical way? Who prefers a tree-based editor? Who loves the existing one and thinks there's no room for improvement? Okay, so that's the topic for today. I will present you a new version of the standard Ecore Editor. Everything I show today is fully open source. Most of it is already available, or actually everything is available. I will have the details on the last slide where to get this stuff. Okay, short agenda. I will give a very brief introduction on what I'm talking about, but I think it's essentially clear. And then I will directly start with a demonstration. So not much theory. I will directly demonstrate the new version of the Ecore Editor. When I'm done with that, I will tell you a little bit on how we built that. I think it's interesting because when we created this editor, we also developed at least two more components which might be interesting for you because you can also use them. The first one is a replacement for the generated editor that you might know. So EMF by default allows you to generate an editor. Problem with that editor is it was never meant to be used for productive projects. It's basically a code example, but on the other side it's pretty useful because you have a working editor without doing anything. However, I've seen many projects starting to modify this editor a lot, and that's not really what it was built for. So we have a solution for that too. Okay, so yeah, that was the introduction. There are different tools for Ecore, for example, Xcore, graphical tools, but still I observe a lot of people using the tree-based editor. At the end of the day, I think it depends a little bit on the models you work with. In my opinion, if you have models with very complicated references and a very complicated structure, then a graphical view, of course, helps to understand those references. While if you have a data model with a lot of attributes and you basically want to enter all those attributes and some references, then the tree-based editor does a good job, basically. Okay, so let's have a look at the thing that we developed. So I have an empty Eclipse modeling edition, and I installed the editor feature, which is currently hosted in the EMF Forms project. So let me create a new modeling project. So I will use this wizard here, call that my model. Just click on finish, not switching perspective. The thing which is opened up here, by the way, just for explanation, because I receive a lot of questions about this, this is the new version of the Ecore tool. So that's the replacement of the old graphical tool, but that has nothing to do with the thing that we did. So let me close that, and now double click the Ecore. So that's the editor that we are currently developing. As you can see, the first major change is that we are not using the properties view, but instead we display all the properties of an element on the right side. So we believe it's more concise and it provides a better overview. So here you can, of course, change all the attributes. It provides live validation. So for example, if I remove the name here, it tells me that something is wrong with my model, so I can correct that. I have all the standard features, of course, so I can right-click here and, for example, create a new E-class. That's something special that might surprise you. We actually discussed this a lot. What should happen if you create a new element? Because most existing editors put that new element just in the tree and focus it so you can edit on the right side. And that's also possible with this editor, but in the current version we actually switched this a bit and we open up a dialog to enter the new element. The advantage of that is, especially if I create quite a few elements, I can do it with my keyboard only. So for example, if I now want to name this class, name it some class, I can just press enter and then I'm finished with that. And now I could create even another class. And of course that makes only sense if we also provide shortcuts to trigger these new actions, and that's what we do. So if I press Ctrl N in this editor, I can create new elements based on the current parent that I have. So for example, for this class, I could now press A, so you see all the available options here, to create a new attribute, and then I have another dialog which allows me to enter the new information pretty quickly. So let's call this first name. For the type, we have an auto-completion field. So if I just type in eString, that's doing the trick, and then I can just press enter, and I can do that again. So another, which is the eString 2, press enter, and for example, is something true, the Boolean, and that's how it goes. So we're interested very much in feedback. So actually the origin of this dialog concept was done by a student, and he did a survey. So he compared the two possibilities based on the usability. And actually the result was that especially users who didn't know the editor before are much faster with this dialog concept. However, we are interested in feedback, so that's not something made in stone. We can change that, while we currently believe this is an improvement. Another thing that you can see on the right side is that we ordered the properties. Sounds very simple, but if you know the existing editor, it's sometimes hard to find the stuff which is really relevant. So what we decided to do is we have one group which shows the standard attributes, the most important one, and if you want to do something else, then you have to click on advanced, and then you find all the remaining stuff. The survey that we did, or the study that we did, showed that this is especially helpful for beginners who do not know all the other attributes. Yeah?
Do you include context help on the elements on the right? If you about
No, not yet, not yet.
That would be a nice thing.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, I think so too. So that brings me to the point, I will mention that at the end again, but we are absolutely interested in feedback. So if you have any good ideas how to prove, like context help, please share that with us, and I would have the contact or the ways to get into contact about that on the last slide. Another thing that you can see on the right side currently is that we implemented some specialized controls for certain types. So for example, to set the bounds, the existing editor has two integer fields which are not even close to each other in the properties view because it's ordered by alphabet. So whenever it makes sense, we try to combine things in a sense in a good way. So for example, the lower bound and the upper bound can now be edited here, and I can directly set it to unbound, so I don't need to know that it has to be -1 in this stuff. Okay, so let me create a second class, and let's call it some container. And in here, let me create a reference, call that children, e-type is some class, and it's unbounded, and it is a container, like this. So now I just did that, so I will have the possibility to create elements later on. Let me think what else I would like. Yes, so there's another thing which is also supported by the existing editor, but we included that too. So here you can load an additional Ecore if you have references between Ecores. So I could simply, for example, load the existing Ecore model in the same editor, and then I can browse it and I could reference elements from here now. So let me close this and open the gen model, because of course it makes sense to use the same technology for the gen model editor too. So let me open that. So as you can see here, we have the same concept. Properties are directly in the same editor. We do not use the properties anymore. And again, we ordered them. So as you might know, there are really a lot of properties in the gen model, so we spent some time to bring it in a good order. As you can also see, it directly loads the Ecore here, and I can modify the Ecore down here. So this is exactly the same editor, and if I only want to do some changes on the Ecore, I don't have to switch back to the Ecore editor. Okay, so let me generate the model. That was a little bit fast. So of course we have the options to generate the model. We're currently discussing what the best combination up here is, because in most projects we typically want to generate the model and the edit bundle at the same time. So that's why we currently have this option in. Yeah, but that's, as I said, that's currently an open point for discussion. Okay, so let me generate the editor too. Okay, so that's it about the basic functionality. I think that's pretty self-explaining. So let me reveal some details on how we created this. So before we talk about how we created that, there's one important aspect I need to explain, and that's the bootstrapping of EMF, which is a little bit confusing if you hear it for the first time. If we use EMF in a classical use case, we use it to describe entities of our application, and then we generate code, we include it in our application, and then we create instances of that model which follow the Ecore model that we defined before. And we typically do that, for example, if we want to create UIs based on those entities. So we show those entities in trees, in forms, or whatever. So, and EMF provides a lot of support for creating the data model, and also a lot of support to create UIs for browsing those data models. Now, if you think about implementing EMF itself, so for example, if we think about implementing an Ecore Editor, it's pretty similar to implementing any other data or entity-centric tool. So this editor here shows us some entities on the left side. So for example, the purple entity is an entity called ePackage. And as children objects of those ePackages, we have eClasses. Now, if we implement this, and if we implement tooling for that, we need to have a Java object representing this node in the tree. So we need a Java object named ePackage. And this Java object then has all the attributes that an ePackage has. So namespace, URI, namespace, and name. Same is true for classes. So again, to implement that, we need a Java class called eClass. And the confusing thing about EMF, it's actually a good thing, but it's, it might be confusing in the beginning, is that EMF uses itself to describe those entities. Because let's just assume you wanted to create a class called ePackage, and it should have 3 attributes. You could simply create an EMF model describing that. And then you would use EMF to describe an EMF entity. And that's what EMF is doing. So there is a Ecore model describing the Ecore language. Edmerx claims that EMF is actually the smallest thing which is capable of describing itself. So if we look at this Ecore model, we have a class called ePackage, eClass, eReference, and eAttribute. So those are all the elements which are existing in Ecore, plus enumeration. Now, why am I explaining this? The good thing about this bootstrapping is, if we want to build up tooling for Ecore, we can use the same technologies as we typically use if we create some UIs for model instances. So, and that's true for all frameworks. We can use, for example, for graphical editors for Ecore, we can use GMF. And for form-based editors, as the one that I just presented, we can actually use EMF forms, because the format is the same. Question for you, who knows EMF forms? Who has attended the last talk? Okay, only 3. I'm sorry for you 3 guys. Very quick introduction. So EMF forms is a framework basically to create form-based UIs for EMF models. So the basic idea is you have a domain model, and this domain model in our use case is the definition of the Ecore language, which describes all the entities and all data attributes. We have a view model that describes the UI, and based on that, EMF forms will automatically produce a user interface for us. And the Ecore Editor has a lot of forms on the right side, so consequently we have used this framework to implement the editor too. Okay, so let's talk about the components that we used for this editor. Actually, we have 2 editors, the Ecore Editor and the GenModel Editor. If you think about the functionality of those 2 editors, they're pretty much the same. They need to load an XML file, they need to display the tree, and on the right side they need to display the details. They need to be capable of loading other files. They need drag and drop, undo, all the classical features. So what we immediately did, of course, is we created a common class, which we call generic editor. And 99% of the features are in here actually, because they are basically the same for both editors. This is an interesting component which I will show later, because that can be reused with any kind of model. Now, if you remember the editor, the major component showing inside of the editor is a tree master detail element. So it shows the tree, and whenever you click something, it shows the detail of this element. So for this, to create this kind of UI, because that's actually something we have to do pretty frequently in different projects, we created a component which we call tree master detail build. It has a very simple API, and it basically allows you to create this tree master detail component with only one call. You can customize it, but it's basically you have a default, so it's not much work to create that. And now finally, within the tree master detail view, on the right side we see the properties, and that's rendered by EMF forms then. So we just call the framework to produce the forms. To make that happen, and to allow customizations, we need to provide 2 things to EMF forms. One is a view model, that's the description of the UI. So this artifact, for example, describes the order in which the attributes should be displayed and how they should be grouped. And we have some extensions to EMF forms which basically provide some controls which are custom to Ecore. So the control showing the lower and upper bound in a combined way, that was one example. So this is not a default control, but basically the combination of 2 existing controls. So that's something that we plugged into EMF forms, because that's possible. So there's API for that, to have yeah, to have basically good support for all the custom types in Ecore. Now, if we look at this architecture, the good thing about it is if we take this away, and this away, and this away, so like this, and there are three elements which can be still used, and they can be used with any kind of EMF model. They are not specific to Ecore, and you can reuse them, so they are part of the framework. And let me actually show you a demonstration of that. So when I generated the editor down here, we added a very small piece to this plugin. So this thing down here is the classical generated editor provided by EMF. So as you might know, it contains a lot of code. It's actually hard-coded. It's not extensible. Basically, I don't recommend to start with this editor as a basis for your application. So what we did in parallel, so as you can see here, there are two editors registered at the moment. One is the one which was generated, and the other registration points to a class called generic editor. You can see that here. And this is the class that I just had on the slide. So it's an editor which is capable of loading any EMF model instance and modifying it as you would expect. The good news is this component is not generated. It's provided by the framework. So if you do that, you don't have to create any code. So let me show you how that looks like. Need to start the application. Make sure nothing is running. So I'm just starting another Eclipse IDE which contains the compiled version of my model as well as the editor registration to show you how this generic editor works in practice. So here I just have an empty project, and now I can create an instance of my model. We haven't touched this wizard yet. We might probably do that soon. So should contain a container. So that's the generated editor, as you probably all know. So it has those different examples. So let's close this one and now open the other one, the EMF Forms editor. And as you can see, it looks pretty similar to the other one because it's based on the same class. And now I can create instances of my own model without writing a single line of code. So I can enter data here and so on and so forth. Now, the good thing is that this editor is completely based on EMF Forms, so you can also use EMF Forms to customize it, especially the view on the right side. So just to give a quick example, I will not go into detail about EMF Forms now, so if you don't know the framework, then talk to me later or visit the website. What I will do is I will create a view model for this, for my class, and I will do a very simple customization, and that is I will group my attributes and say that's my group, like that. So that's the way how you would do it in EMF Forms. So let me restart the application. And now if I click here, you will see that I've changed the UI on the right side. That's a very simple type of customization. Basically, you can customize everything on the right side. So you can plug in your own controls, your own UI elements. You can model the UI. So everything is possible because that's, at the end, that's pure SWT. Okay, so I hope this is useful too. I would say these kind of tools are especially useful if you just get started with a new model, because you can immediately create instances, show them, share them, just file-based. Another use case which we frequently observe is tools which are developed in-house for certain purposes to model some configuration and stuff. And there might not be budget to really create a full-blown tool, but you just need an editor to enter some data. And there are a lot of use cases for that, and I think that's pretty useful to implement those configuration tools or configuration editors. There's one last thing that I would like to show. I've shown you this. So that's the component that I've just demonstrated. I want to quickly show how to use that one, because that's also an interesting component in case you need to program such a tree master detail view and you want to embed it anywhere, in a view, in a dialog, wherever. So there is API for that, and let me actually just show you the code there. So let me open the generic editor and then browse to the create tree master detail method. So this is the method in the generic editor which creates the tree master detail, including the forms. And as you can see here, it uses a tree master detail SWT factory, and that's the only thing that you have to provide. So it's basically the parent composite to render this tree master detail on, and the input for the tree. This is some callback because we are customizing the creation of the create child menu in this tree. If you don't want to do that, you don't need this parameter, and then we basically just call create. So we are implementing a builder pattern here. So this line of code will create the complete tree master detail component, and I think it saves a lot of time if you need such components. In the meantime, we have also refactored this a bit to have a second factory which is capable of only creating a tree, because probably you need also trees sometimes. So if you want to create an EMF-based tree, you can use this factory too.
Is it a typo in the method name? Customized child creation.
This is a very, sorry, this is, you mean this?
Yeah.
That's a method.
Yeah, is that a typo?
That's a typo, yes.
Okay.
Now I know what you mean.
Yeah?
Yeah, it's child creation.
Okay.
Okay. And before this question comes up, these factories, they work in a way that they provide a default to you, but you can still customize everything. So for example, if you want to replace drag and drop behavior or the child creation menu or something, you can always do that over the API. But if you don't need to do that, you can just use the default. Okay, let me go back to the slides. So where to get that? Everything I've shown today is hosted in the project EMF Forms. That's an Eclipse open source project under EPL, so you can consume it like all other technologies. So the components is not yet contained in a release. If you want to get it, the best way to get it would actually be to consume our nightly development update site. The component is also in the latest milestones, but on the nightly update side you really get the latest state, and we are currently actively working on that. And the feature you want to install is Ecore Editor feature. That's the name of the feature. And you can install that into your IDE. And we are very interested in feedback, so please use our Baxilla or the news group to give us feedback. And we are really interested in that. I mean, if you don't like a certain way how we implemented something, then please just tell us. So this is currently in a beta state. We use it ourselves, but I would definitely not call it final. There are some existing bugs. There are definitely things to be improved. However, we want to continue to work on that, and Neon would be the release where we plan to really contribute it to the Eclipse release train and maybe not make it default, but at least have it in the installation so you can select yourself whether you want to use this one or the existing one instead. Okay, and of course contributions to this are welcome. Okay, that would be it. I think I have some time to answer questions. Yeah?
It's really fantastic, and it seems you've got 90% of the way to not needing to start a nested Eclipse, because could you have a reflective generic editor?
Yes, so technically that would be possible. We have not done it yet, but it's actually a good idea. Yeah. Any more questions? Yeah.
I'm afraid I missed the first couple of minutes, but are you providing any extended support for e-annotations and gen annotations? Because it would be really nice if it was possible to basically have a mini model
Yeah.
of committed gen annotations.
So the question was whether we provide specific support, for example, for e-annotations. At the moment, we are focused on the most common elements. This is basically e-class, e-attribute, e-reference, and enum. It's possible to create e-annotations too, but we have not spent time in providing better support for that. But I agree with you, that would actually be a good thing to do. And I think with the current architecture that we have, it should be very easy to plug in certain UI controls, for example, to better support the creation of e-annotations. Okay, so thank you everybody for attending this talk. If you have additional questions, you can also meet me at our booth. It's here on the left side, or of course write me an email, get in contact with me. And now I wish you good lunch.